Hey you! Today we're going to be doing something a little bit out of the ordinary, hence all of this. We are going to be starting a new series, which is finding the Book of the Dragonborn from Skyrim. This is going to be a 3-part series, starting with the making of the symbol of the Dragonborn, which is also the Seal of Akatosh, which is also the emblem of the Imperials. Oh my gosh, this thing has so many names. Now, luckily, I have access to a 3D printer. It is my husband's, it is not mine. Therefore, I only kind of know what I'm doing with it, but we're gonna figure this out. So one of the first things I had to do before printing this thing was to determine the size of it. I wanted this to be a sort of screen accurate Book of the Dragonborn. Therefore, I wanted to know how big would this thing be in our world. So I had to find a real life object that also existed in the game. My first thought was a human skull, and I proceeded to Google the size of that, so I am pretty sure I'm on some like really interesting watch lists now. But apples also exist in Skyrim. Apples exist here, apples exist in Skyrim, so it works out, right? So I logged into the game. Man, that makes me sound old. So I went ahead and I started up Skyrim, as one does. For research purposes, I spent 10 minutes knocking a copy of the Book of the Dragonborn off of a table onto the ground, and then I proceeded to drop, I think, somewhere between 8 and 12 apples around it, trying to get one to line up just right so that it was like sideways, so I had the height of the apple and the height of the book, and I could have something that was like apples to apples. Sorry. So once I got a good one, I took a screenshot of it and proceeded to hold a ruler up to the screen of my computer to determine the length of both the apple and the book and the width of the book, so that once I knew the size of the apple, I would be able to find the ratio of the apple to the book, and then the ratio of the length of the book to the width of the book, and then I'd know how big the book was. So once I knew what the size of a Skyrim apple was and the book in the game, I had to find out how big was a real life apple. Well, folks, apples come in size range. The apples in Skyrim are green, but they're kind of big looking. So I went with the higher end of the range. By the way, apples are between 2 and 5 inches on average. So I determined 3 possible book sizes, the 3. And I based it upon a 4-inch apple, a 4.5-inch apple, and a 5-inch apple. I'm really glad that I did those lower ones, like the 4, because it turns out, I wasn't paying attention, that my printer bed can only go so big. So I went with about the 4-inch, and I'll put all the dimensions that I ended up with on the screen. Next, and not shown, I entered the size of the symbol into the slicer program on the file I got from Thingiverse to change the dimensions. I also had to change the, is it height? Is it considered a height? I think it's considered height. It's the y-axis of the symbol, because it was about a centimeter thick in the original file, even with the adjusted length of it, which, if you're not familiar with centimeters, it's a little less than half an inch, and it was huge. So then I put this file onto a flash drive, hooked it up to the printer, and here we are. Now that the print itself is done, we need to cure it. The first thing I'm going to do is snap off all of the supports that I put on there, and there were a lot of supports. This took me a long time. I think this took me like an hour. So I snapped up all the supports. I rinsed everything because it had just come out of an ultrasonic bath and was basically covered in cleaner. So now that I've done that, I am going to cure this for a couple of days. I know it's only supposed to take a few hours, but I really need to make sure this thing is not tacky at all. All right, so now that it is all cured and not sticky, which is good, I have to prep it for painting. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sand it down with some little tiny metal files just to make sure that everything's nice and flat, because of the supports and those connections, it is actually not smooth on the back. After that, I am going to prime it. I used the Army Painter color primer in Uniform Gray, and this is a spray primer to prime it. It dries pretty quickly, however I did want to let it dry a little longer than was technically necessary because I wanted to, once again, make sure there was no tackiness. It's especially important because I did some dry brushing on this thing, and that can put little tiny marks into the print that you may not want on the primer. So I let this dry for a couple of hours. It did not smell great, I will say that. Like, it really did not smell very good. So I let that dry for a few hours just because I didn't want to get a headache while I was painting. And once that was done, it was time to paint. So the paints I used are Deco Art Dazzling Metallics in Shimmering Silver, which is the most accurate metal paint that I've seen that's an acrylic. It works pretty good. It goes on very smooth, not thick, not gloppy at all. It looks great. And then I also used Lumiere by Jacquard. It's a light body metallic acrylic in the color pewter, and that was for the weathering and the darker accents on the symbol. So the first thing I did was put that base coat of just pure silver. It made it look very shiny, very new, a little too new, because I'm pretty sure this book's supposed to be pretty like worn and old just based on like the wear patterns of the pages and of the symbol itself. And then I weathered it up using the pewter paint, and this is what we've got. Okay, so now that we have one symbol of the Dragonborn, or, you know, Seal of Akatosh, emblem of the Imperials, whatever, we can proceed to the next step. Okay, so next time in this series we are going to be putting together the book block. So if you want to see how this book comes together and follow along on the journey of creating the Book of the Dragonborn, go ahead and subscribe, and if you enjoyed watching me paint the symbol and make it, give it a like. And I will see you next time.